Hello, welcome to Town Hall. I am Meredith Lilly, your host. Thank you so much for going on this journey with me for the past few weeks. It has been incredibly just a great process. This has been so good, and I just thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this show has been insightful, resourceful, and educational. The goal of today's show is to stimulate genuine fact-based conversation around tough education issues that affect our community. I have a great lineup for you today. I am so excited for everyone that's on the show today, and I can't wait till you meet them all. We have Dr. Autumn Jeter, Superintendent of Bessemer City Schools, Alabama. Danielle West, CEO of Queen City Academy Charter School in New Jersey. Shavar Jeffries, Director of Education Reform Now. He's also a lawyer and civil rights activist. And we have Dr. Brent Johnson, educational professor or associate professor of education at Gordon State College. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having
Good to
me.
be here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much for being on. And we have a great show lined up. So I just kind of want to just jump in so we can get all the questions that have been asked to us through this network out to the community as much as we get many questions answered to the community as we can today. So we're going to start off with you, Shavar Jeffries. You're the Director of Education Reform Now, which you can give us a little background on. But obviously you think that education reform is necessary. Can you tell us why? And just give people that just don't know, they hear a lot of talk about education reform. Tell us what it is. Is it financial based? Is it smaller classrooms? You know, what is it? And just tell us about your organization. Thank you.
Well, first, thanks, Meredith. Thanks for having me, and thanks for just being the amazing leader you are. I'm honored to be here with our fellow panelists. And for us, education reform, from my vantage point, is essential because our public school system in this country really wasn't designed to educate Black and brown students well. And we know for most of the history of our country, the public education system was actually designed to segregate us and subordinate us into spaces that disallowed us from engaging in the practice of freedom and liberation. And so for me, education reform is how do we disrupt, how do we transform these systems so that actually can serve low-income students and Black and brown students in particular. And so for me, education reform really means 5 issues. One, the foundation of it is standards and accountability, that we really have high standards for our children. Particularly when it comes to our Black students, people can be quick to believe about what we can't do and think we're not as smart and not as talented. So we have to have very high standards rooted in the idea that our children are geniuses, they're brilliant, they can change the world, they will change the world, but our adults got to have that belief in them. Then we got to hold the system accountable to actually deliver on a type of education that'll deliver against that promise. Second, for me, is then resource equity. We know too many of our schools are underinvested, that there hasn't been the investment, not only in terms of money and dollars, but in terms of curriculum, in terms of resources, in terms of educational tools. We see COVID right now. We see so many of our young people just don't even have the internet access to make remote learning possible. So resource equity is critical. Third for us is reimagining teacher prep so we can make sure our teachers have the skills and tools they need to drive instruction for our young people from day one. Most of our teachers, about 65% in recent studies, say what they learned in graduate schools of ed didn't equip them for the classroom. Fourth for us is more choices within the public education system. We believe deeply that Black and brown parents should have more options. They know their children best. They know the ways in which their children learn best, and they deserve options. Middle-class people and the wealthy already have options. We want low-income folks to have them too. And then finally, higher ed reform. We need reform in terms of access. We have too many colleges that have legacy preferences, fundraising preferences, the way they use early decision that make it harder for qualified students of color to access. We have colleges that are not affordable, so we got to have more investments so that college is affordable for our young people. Then we have to hold our colleges accountable too. We have some colleges that are basically dropout factories where less than 25% of people graduate, so we got to hold them accountable as we make more investments. We got to see those numbers go up in terms of completion as well.
Wow, thank you. You hit on something, resource equity. And I think I want to go to Danielle and Dr. Jeter about this. What is going on during COVID right now? How is it hard? I mean, I know it's so many issues going on right now in your school systems. Danielle, can you hit on resource equity first, and then I'll go over to Dr. Jeter.
It definitely is a challenging time. Many state budgets have been impacted. So we have seen the effects of COVID directly on our schools. However, it is a time of opportunity, I always say as well. I think it's a great time to rethink how we were doing things. So in terms of resource equity, we noticed very early on as our small charter school, as well as the charter school network or networks here in New Jersey, we've been able to see that early April, the end of October, we were able to really hit the ground running a lot different than some of the traditional public schools were in terms of making sure our scholars were equipped with devices as well as internet access. So while some districts were still up and not running come September, all of our scholars pretty much we had made sure they either had a hotspot and they definitely had a device. And if they did not have that accessibility at home, we were equipping families with that because we realized that this remote instruction, it was not going to work through just handing someone a packet and saying, complete this packet, right? We still needed to engage with families and scholars. And we did that by making sure that they had the accessibility needed to be able to communicate with them because many of our families were just not online yet. They weren't up and running. And so when we think about resource equity, I think a big piece of that and that we need to start having a conversation around is how do we make sure in the 21st century that all families have accessibility to the internet? It's almost as though that needs to be a public utility today. We can no longer expect our children to be able to compete with students around the globe when they don't have access to those students and to those information highways that they need through the internet.
Dr. Jeter?
Yes, I'll jump in there as well. Thank you for having me and welcome and hello to all of my colleagues on the call. And I work in a traditional public school setting. I always have, which I love and adore and promote. But as it relates to the resource equity, COVID, when it hit for us here in Alabama, March 13th was the date that we all dismissed from school for the most part in this area. We really realized at that point, and when I say we, several of the superintendents that have been in conversation in our area, we really realized that there was an equity divide or resource divide. You had your haves and your have-nots, depending on where you live. And as I mentioned, I work in a higher poverty school setting now, and it was disastrous for us to up and leave all of a sudden. Thankfully, we already had resources in place because we are supplied with a sufficient amount of federal funds. And so we were already a one-to-one divide school system, but there were kinks in that road as well. But even deeper than that, for my school system in particular, in conversation with other superintendents and legislators, we've learned and we know now that this is bigger, this is deeper. This conversation of resource divide or equity divide needs to be a legislative conversation, and it is becoming one because those who were able to scoot right along back in March through the end of that school year, and those who had not had to wait on funding to be supplied, and then there was this hold up with China. You couldn't order resources, and the children that really need were held behind even more because you couldn't order the devices because of the governmental hold. But what we've learned, or what I've learned since we've been home for COVID, but we're back in school now, is that this conversation about the equity divide or the lack of resources for all is bigger, it's deeper. It needs to be a legislative conversation per state to ensure access to the internet to all, regardless of where you're located, and a device for all. And as mentioned, the funding is there. The federal government provided various federal funding for all school systems. It comes with stipulations, but it's been a great addition and a great help for us. It's just 2 minutes behind what we really needed it for and when.
Oh,
Right.
wow. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. West.
I definitely agree with Autumn in terms of the legislative piece and making sure that the conversation gets started. Here in New Jersey, our legislators have also started having those conversations about the equity divide and resource divide. But I think more simplistic, also on the school level, it's our obligation to make sure that we're allocating those resources that we do have in the appropriate fashion so that they get into the hands of our families. Far too long, I think we are not doing our due diligence the way that we need to on the school system level or the school level to make sure that we're allocating towards those things that are really going to move instruction forward and give our kids access.
Now, what were some of the things, and I'm going to get to you, Dr. Johnson. Give me 1 second. I want to kind of go back to Shavar really quickly and stay here with Danielle, West, and Dr. Jeter. Shavar, you have raised billions of dollars in terms of education reform. And I hope I'm saying that right. I think I read that you've raised billions of dollars. How can smaller school systems that are still waiting on, or rural areas that are still waiting on the federal government funding, how can they touch base and get some of this money out, tap into some of these resources? I go to rural areas all the time, because I live in the South, and I was out last week passing out food boxes that I got from Atlanta and took them down to a rural area to senior citizens because they didn't have food in their area. They don't get free food boxes like you do in the inner city. Same as with educational resources. How can we get some of that down to some of the rural Black areas, the Bible Belt, the Black Belt in the South? And that's just a question to you, Shavar.
Yeah, and so we're involved in lobbying the feds, and so, for example, we're part of the coalition that pushed the feds in the first CARES Act bill. Originally, they're going to put $3 billion on the table, and we're part of a group, and it's a diverse group. It was a whole bunch of us that pushed them to go from $3 billion to almost $31 billion. And so what we need to do is throughout the country, but particularly in the South, to answer your question, Meredith, the local congresspersons and the senators, and then frankly lobbying the governor, have to be held accountable, because a lot of those dollars went to state governors who then had a lot of discretion about how they would allocate and appropriate those dollars. And we know that oftentimes in all parts of the country, and in the South as well, that if we don't have the right representation at the state level, they'll allocate those dollars to white communities, to middle income communities, to wealthy communities, and we'll get the scraps. And so that's where we have to be organized at the local level, because many of us at the federal level are fighting to get those dollars allocated, and then local, state-based elected officials have significant discretion about how they appropriate those dollars. So I would say in any of those communities, Meredith, where people don't see those dollars in their local communities, we got to work with our local Congress people, our local electeds. We got to organize. We got to make some noise so our kids can get the resources that they deserve.
And that's why voting is so important, but we'll touch on that later. Voting is so important. Now, Danielle, and this is just, I know you and Autumn, Dr. Jeter have been working so long in education, and y'all are so passionate about it. What are some of the things that you see in your own schools? Because I know that you all work with Black and brown children. The majority of your kids are Black and brown in your districts. So what are some of the things that you see are missing in the homes, missing in the school district, that you would like to see the federal government, your state legislators, your congressmen jump in and kind of help with immediately?
So
I
go
think
ahead.
really that continuum of care. It is a full-on wraparound approach at this time, and we've taken that as our motto as a school right now. So making sure that our students, one, are safe, two, are healthy, so making sure that they have access to food, meals, and delivering that to the families however we can, and then access and that emotional well-being. So, I think that totality of ensuring that we are wrapping around not just the scholar, but we're wrapping services around for the family as well. That's something that I think is of vital importance right now. And in terms from a legislative perspective, from our Congress people down to our assembly folks, down to our local mayoral representation, I think that providing assistance to schools to provide that kind of wraparound care. So like we've partnered with local organizations to deliver regular groceries to our families. So outside of the federal free lunch program that we've continued to provide to our school and the community, we've also been doing grocery drops, because we realize, the kids may eat Monday through Friday for free lunch, but what's going to happen on Saturday and Sunday? What's happening with mom and dad? Are they able to eat? So those basic necessities of life are very important at this time. And so from a legislative perspective, if congressional folks and local elected officials can continue to make sure that those needs are being met for a community by partnering with local food banks, making sure that federal dollars are able to assist and aid in that regard, I think we're going to hit the mark.
I agree with Danielle on those food resources, because you think about it, we go from, even in your middle of the road or middle class families, but in particular your areas of high poverty or rural, we went from having our children every day and we feed them breakfast and lunch to all of a sudden you're home every day, all day. So even a family that maintains and does well, when you take them off that normal routine, all of a sudden you have children, if you have multiple children at the home all day, every day. And that becomes quite a concern on finances for some families if they had not planned for that. So continuing to provide those services as it relates to meals or boxes, we're able to pack out boxes to give to our children to take home for weeks. We have on top of the school lunch and the school breakfast program where we go out and deliver those services, those meals to the families. But I would also add, besides the internet, we know that that's necessary. The pandemic has truly shown that gap in the haves and the have-nots as it relates to Wi-Fi. But then also social and emotional services. There's a lot of counseling that's needed. Just in my district, since we were out March 13th, so since we've been out, I've lost 4 children from March 13th to today. 4 children to either gun violence. Well, no, all 4. No, 3 were gun violence and 1 was a car accident. So we need to make sure that our families have the necessary therapy or they have social and emotional organizations or nonprofits that are out there to counsel families, children, or just to provide activities, because you also find in your high poverty areas or rural areas that during the pandemic, the recreation centers are closed, the parks are closed or roped off and you can't get in them. So what do you do then? The children just are running around, either they're in the house all day playing a video game, which is okay if a parent monitors that, or they're getting into some things or situations that they should not be involved in. So we need to make sure that social and emotional support is provided for our children and families.
I think it's also vital, and I think this has exposed or pulled the Band-Aid off, the need for school districts and local school networks, charter school, public, whatever the case may be, to have those public-private partnerships. I always have valued the need of development for our school as an organization, but COVID really highlighted the necessity of it. Right? It's not a luxury anymore. It really became a necessity for us to look at development and then start thinking about what are going to be our public and private partnerships that can harness us or carry us over rather. So when a pandemic hits or when some unfortunate situation hits, or maybe not even just an unfortunate situation, just to put us in position. So when we look at schools and we look at, universities, they have huge endowments that really supplement who they are. And so I think from an educational perspective, we really need to start looking at education in that regard. What is going to be our supplemental income? What is going to carry us over? What is going to allow us to provide our scholars and our families and our employees the access and the leverage that they need to get over the hump? And I think we know that one of those biggest pieces is dollars, but we can't keep taxing tax bases, right? And the federal government can't be our end all be all. So we also really need to look at how do we build these public-private partnerships and or our own individual endowment funds through giving.
All right, and Dr. Brent, and just think about that for a second, Shavar, because I want to come back to how do we build what Danielle just said, but I want to hear your thoughts. You've heard everything, Dr. Johnson.
Sure.
And Shavar Jeffries hit on higher education. So I want to hear your thoughts on everything that you've heard.
Well, actually, I think my panelists are spot on. And just to illuminate some of those ideas, as we know, the pandemic has definitely shone a light on the current, present, and historical inequities in the school system. Currently, as we know, that the pandemic disproportionately affects people of color. To every one person that gets COVID, 6 people of color get COVID. So we understand that when America catches a cold, we catch the flu. So some of the ideas that the panelists were actually saying and stating are very important. As we know, the inequities that were apparent didn't just appear out of nowhere. We're talking about macro decisions over time that has accumulated. For an example, Brown versus Board, even though the 14th Amendment allowed us to desegregate schools, there was very poor oversight in the implementation. And with the poor oversight and with implementation, we had failed marginal successes and a lot of failures in actually desegregating schools. Also, I think the panelists hit on this idea of funding, and we need to revisit funding. Our panelists hit on the importance of private-public partnerships, but we also have to look at how schools are funded overall. Kozol wrote a book years ago about savage inequalities, and we've also had actual state-level court cases of unconstitutional funding. In fact, in Ohio, the DeRoff case, there was 4 different cases that proved that the state of Ohio was inadequately funding schools. They were found guilty of the formula, yet nothing was ever done to rectify the situation. And we see this throughout states. So as important as it is to advocate for private and public partnerships, it's equally as important to continue to advocate at the federal level, at the national level, to relook at funding. We often say that education is the road to equality or this road to equity, but we actually found out that's not the case. So we say one thing, but our actions, our macro actions as a country, and our micro actions, and I'll say the de facto social contracts that have been held in terms of redlining, in terms of food health, counter I can't even call it a claim, because a claim has evidence, counter this assertion of education as being this this idea, this lane for equality. I often say, and not only as a professor, but I also work with an elementary school in Lithonia as a licensed school counselor. So I do agree with the importance of the social emotional piece. But going back to the point, we often have this idea of being able to ensure that our students have the ability to ascend from poverty to middle class, from middle class to upper class, but primarily from poverty to middle class. And we talk about this idea of a meritocracy, which that has its place. However, when we create the ladder, we also have to create the rungs. And so what I've seen throughout our history is we have this outline of the ladder that has throughout our history we're missing these rungs. The rungs being effective and equitable funding. The rungs being, and I'm going to kind of speak to myself and in terms of someone who develops teacher candidates and student and college preparations program. This issue of preparing our teachers technically to instruct and to deliver content, but not understanding the foundational aspects and not understanding contextually. You know, how do we teach Black and brown children? How do we teach poor children? How the pedagogy must be adjusted, how the pedagogy must be different, how we have to contextually include those lived experiences into our pedagogy so they understand that schools.
Right. That's exactly why at this. That's exactly why this time it was such an opportunity, because that's just what we've been doing. So we recently revamped our whole curriculum about a year and a half ago now, 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago, to make sure that we're focusing on that Black and brown lived experience. So then when COVID hit, it became, how do we up the ante even more to make sure that we're providing that stepping stone for both our scholars and our teachers. So on the scholar end, we use this to our advantage, and we do a synchronous instruction day on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday. But Wednesday, we devoted it to coding, and we partnered with a local coding school to provide every one of our students coding classes, and then our teachers provide asynchronous instruction while the coding is happening in a synchronous format. And then for our teachers on that day now, just what you were talking about, we were able to do, and making sure that our teachers are provided PD to understand not just how to deliver virtual content, but how to make sure that they really know how to teach Black and brown children, because that's such a big piece of this, right? And build those effective relationships. And because of everything that happened this summer and the world around us, we also knew that it was paramount for our school to really engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, because we hadn't really been doing that work. But if we don't do that kind of work, we can write the nicest curriculum and we get pushback from it, right? Because teachers don't want to deliver that curriculum. They start thinking, oh, is this too political? Is this, I'm uncomfortable, because the majority, about 80 to 85% of our teacher workforce, they're Caucasian women, right? Coming to teach Black and brown students. So knowing that and being cognizant of the fact that our teachers may not look like our students, we have to make sure that they're equipped to understand and deal with situations that they may find uncomfortable when they enter into that classroom, so that they can deliver the content the way that we're expecting it to be delivered.
Education moved culture. And as we have to understand, this is prior to the internet, prior to TV, prior to radio. How are we going to create a certain idea for a certain country? How are we going to create a certain hierarchy and a certain understanding that all people understand and accept? Well, schools move that. Well, today we've seen the results of this movement, and we've seen the positive and more for us, for our community, the negative results, the dropout rates, the number of students of Black males specifically in prison versus the Black males that make up population. I think we may be 6 or 7% of the population.
Right, and I want to hit on that,
So
Dr. Johnson. Let me jump in right quick.
I'm sorry. Let me close my mouth.
That's okay. No. Look, you said you're gonna get all your time back. I don't blame you.
Oh no,
But,
not at all.
Okay, so
I was just supporting my panelists, and they're on point, and history
Yes.
kind of validates these claims.
Absolutely, and so we're going to come back to that. Well, Dr. Jeter, you had something. You had jumped in and wanted to say something to that point. You go
I was
ahead,
just
and then I'm
adding,
going to go over to the
very, very briefly what Danielle mentioned about knowing the children's home lives, and I was just adding, and I jotted a note down. We have to ensure that our teachers and our other employees understand where the children are from, meaning their home lives, not necessarily where they're from, but what is life like for them at home. And this is even, believe it or not, a legislative issue when we speak of funding. But we went pre-COVID. It's always recommended that you take your employees around the neighborhood if you're a community school and you're able to, but drive around the neighborhood so that teachers can really see where the students are coming from and what they deal with at home. So before we lash out at them for not completing a homework assignment, mom truly may be working 2 or 3 jobs, and older brother or sister may be having to see about the younger sibling. So it's very important for us as educators in leadership or in the classroom to be able to relate to where our children are coming from.
I definitely agree with Autumn, and I think I'm gonna add one piece to that is also making sure that when we take them around, because we do that with our staff, we go on a bus tour yearly, well, not yearly, but every few years with our staff, making sure they understand the richness of a community so that they don't just walk into the classroom and look at those deficits of that student, but they see the brilliance that is there. Because all too often, people will come into an inner city or come into a very impoverished neighborhood and say, oh, these poor babies, I gotta be the savior. No. You don't have to be the savior. You have to walk in and understand, this has been my lived experience, but this is all of the richness that comes with my lived experience, because guess what? As a people, we overcome all the time, despite what's there, right? Despite the things that we don't have, we have so much. Meredith is a personal friend of mine. So I remember one day we went to Cuba. And in Cuba, we were looking around, and I'm so happy that she always imparts these words of wisdom, because we were sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't have anything. They're so poor. And we happened to look across, and it was a rooftop, and it was this family dancing on the rooftop. So amidst the buildings that, were in ruins, was this family, and there was this unit of just celebration. And I think that that's the same way that people need to approach when they come and work in our schools. Yes, you might walk into a neighborhood that may not look typical to what you're used to seeing, but know that there is so much brilliance there, and there's so much to celebrate. Because once you can identify that there are things there to celebrate, you're going to make sure that you approach those kids not at a deficit, but instead at a point of opportunity. And this is all of the brilliance that lies there.
And
it's so funny. Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
No, I
Go
think
ahead,
we're
Dr.
looking
Johnson.
at capitalism versus wealth. And I think when you all were in Cuba, you all saw this wealth. And to decouple this idea of poor and incapable, and then we marry poor with efficient. No, it's wealth and creativity, wealth and ideas. And so I just want to say, it looked like you all were able to observe that in Cuba and understand, okay, what we're seeing is wealth. You know, this wealth of ideas, this wealth of love in this community, and how do we incorporate that into the classroom?
Absolutely, and it's so funny because I was going to say with Dr. Jeter and I, we went to the same schools all our lives, and some of our teachers lived in our neighborhoods. I remember
Right.
when I would act up, my teacher would come to our house. You know, see my dad outside cutting the grass, and say, you know, Lily is out there acting a fool. You know, and I'd be so upset because I look out the window and my dad like, what? Come out here, you know, and my teacher would be standing in my front yard. And so, and I just
And that
thought
was
about
it.
that as you
And that, Meredith, that's
go.
that true sense of community that we're
Yeah.
missing or that we've lost for whatever reason. And it helps having your teachers or your principal or whomever in your neighborhood or in the neighboring neighborhood and had that personal connection with your parents truly made a world of a difference. And that would help with behaviors and expectations and everything else, because you never knew when Mrs. Henry or Dr. Richardson or somebody was
Yes,
going to come out.
that's right. And that touches on another subject, which we're not going to get on today, but community policing. It kind of goes hand in hand. But that's a whole another subject. But Shavar, I'm going to come back to you. Danielle touched on something earlier about how do we build. And so I want to start with you on that. How do we build or rebuild or start or continue building? Because some communities have already, but how do we build?
Yeah, I think it first starts with a lot of what we're talking about here is remembering how amazing we are as a people. That we have the capacity within ourselves, within our own families and communities, to create the types of schools that'll serve our children well. And so I think owning the educational mechanisms in our community. I mean, no longer can we have others, whether we're in the traditional public school framework, a public charter school framework. No longer can we have others coming in to impose upon us their vision of what education ought to look like for us. Because oftentimes, as we've seen, that vision reflects people's biases, whether they're conscious or implicit, about who we are and what we can do. And so I think part of what it is organizing our local communities to basically control the mechanisms of education in our spaces. So whether that's our traditional public school system, part of the reason that some of us got involved in public charter schools, that we could actually just create our own schools. So many of us were fighting the system, and after a while, we said, I'm gonna stop having to keep fighting. I'm just create something alternate that can reflect the best interests of our community. But we can also just own the traditional public school spaces and mechanisms as well. And this also gets into what you talked about earlier in terms of the importance of voting. If the people who control resource allocation to our public schools, who control curriculum, who control the hiring of school leaders and teachers, who control the hiring of the assessment protocols, if they don't reflect our values, we're going to continue to be, as Carter G. Woodson talked about so long ago, we're going to continue to be miseducated. We're going to be educated into a space that signals we're less than, we're not as talented. Because even the conversation we have, when we got to show folk who we already are, they shouldn't be in front of our kids already. Like if we gotta do what we have to do, but if we gotta come educate you to how brilliant our children are, you shouldn't be in front of our kids. You know, I was at this banquet maybe 2 years ago. It was for a school system. They had the slides up about the black and brown students who are going to college and all of that. And then they had a slide about we're proving it's possible that black and brown students can go to college. And I spoke to the school lead afterwards. I said, how long has your school been in place? And he said, we've been here since about 2007. So you mean to tell me until you showed up in 2007, we ain't no black and brown kids could go to college? So you already didn't believe in us. If you felt we got to go prove something, that we need some new data to prove what's possible. And so part of what it is, we got to have people who believe in the brilliance and capacity of our children. And sometimes that's us. Right? Some of us have internalized white supremacy too, about our own community. And so we got to make sure that those who are in front of our babies believe in their capacity, believe in their brilliance, that the curriculum, the pedagogy, the resources are allocated in a way to deliver upon that. And then I think we can get to a different level.
Awesome. And now I'm going to go to Danielle and then go over to Dr. Johnson. Danielle, do charter school benefit people of color?
You know,
There's so
I've
much
worked
debate
in,
about charter schools, so I want to
so
hear directly from you.
I first want to give a little backdrop. So I've worked in a traditional public school setting in Newark Public Schools for more than 9 years. Then I worked in rural North Carolina in a town called Charlotte for Brunswick, or I lived in Charlotte, but worked in and for Brunswick County school systems. And I got to go up and down a county that was very vast. So it had the haves and the have-nots. At one end of the county was the haves, and then at the other end of the county is what what someone would term the have-nots. I didn't look at it that way per se, but having worked in and now working at a charter school, having worked at the gamut of schools from a big inner city public school system to a rural county-wide school system to now being the CEO of a charter school. The one thing that I'm going to say is a school is a school. And if it's a good school, it's a good school. And that hinges off of what are the expectations that people have of themselves, of the scholars that sit in front of them, and of the families. Because at the end of the day, it's education. Now, the one thing that I do appreciate of being at a charter school currently and seeing and being a part of the charter school movement is the lack of bureaucracy and the leanness that we have to where something happens, there's this expediency that we're able to move at, normally because you're very lean, which I haven't gotten to see in the public school or the traditional school setting as much. However, I also worked in a traditional school that provided and moved kids forward, right? But we had a very strong leader that was leading the charge. Always shout her out because she's a mentor to me, Kathy Duke Jackson, who made sure that those people under her charge, they believed in the kids that sat in front of them. And so, you know, I think a good school is a good school. I think it really is good to have choice. So that parents, because I have parents that have a kid in a traditional public school and then they have a kid at my school, right? It's about having that choice to decide what is best for your child. Growing up in Newark, my parents had choice for me, but unfortunately it was choice that they had to pay for because I went to parochial school while we lived in Newark my entire life. But it was that choice. It was knowing your child. And so I do think that charter schools provide that option of choice, and it becomes another opportunity for a family to say, this is what works for me and my family, and determine where they want to send their child.
Thank you. Thank you. Shavar Jeffries, well, let me go to Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, Mr. Jeffries hit on something earlier about the pathway from high school to college. Is there a way that we can ensure a stronger pathway for our community, our students from high school to college?
There is, and many schools are post-secondary schools are beginning to offer it, and it's the Bridge program, as well as dual enrollment opportunities. I believe if we can get more Black and Brown kids in dual enrollment opportunities at the high school level, they begin to understand that they're capable of the rigors of college work, of post-secondary work. If they as early as their sophomore year, junior year, begin to take a college course, they understand that they can compete. And so one method to prepare our students is dual enrollment. The other method I would choose is, and I think my colleagues would agree, is to open up the AP tracks. Often AP tracks have been limited to specific empirical tests. And often that does not include the intellectual creativity of our students. But if we create assessments that are inclusive to our students' intellect and the various ways that we are smart, it's not if we are smart, it's how we are smart, and open these AP pathways, I think that also gives students the confidence that they need, and the confidence that they know that they can continue into the post-secondary track and continue their careers through the first level post-secondary, which is the bachelor's, through the graduate, to the doctorate level of many of our colleagues. One thing we have to constantly do, and that's through either the linear way of AP and dual enrollment, or just providing that extra support, just constantly having conversations with our students to reinforce their self-esteem. We know that those are important to move our students from the secondary to the post-secondary.
I just want to supplement. I agree entirely with my brother in terms of what he just put on the table. I think it's also true. We also have to hold these institutions accountable as well, because there is significant inequity in terms of how the institutions are going about their admissions practices. First, you have the legacy preference. I love Duke. I'm a graduate of Duke University. Love Duke. Had an amazing time. Duke didn't allow Black people to attend until 1963. Who's going to benefit from the legacy preference from a place like Duke? Many of these schools now use the early decision as the primary gatekeeping mechanism. So many of these schools, half of their class is admitted through early decision. Early decision, you got to agree to the admission even before you know what the financial aid package is. Working families, working poor families, many families of color, they can't afford to do that. If you got $2,000, you can buy yourself a couple hundred points on the SAT. Princeton Review, Kaplan, they literally guarantee you 200 additional points on the SAT if you go through their course. A lot of working families don't have a couple $1,000s to go spend for a fancy program to get their kids admitted into school. On top of that, schools have the development office preference, where if you come from a wealthy family, you'll get additional consideration in the admissions process. On top of all of that, because a lot of the higher education institutions are under significant pressure, we've done a whole series of reports showing that schools have dramatic differences in terms of admissions rates of highly qualified low-income Pell Grant eligible students as compared to middle and upper income students. But the other thing too is we see many schools are very different in terms of the degree to which they admit Pell Grant students. So we have many colleges will admit lower qualified, wealthier students who can afford to pay than qualified Pell Grant low-income students who even have better academic qualifications. So the point of all that I'm saying is we got to hold these institutions accountable too. There's a lot of conversation now about free and affordable college. That's critical. But we got to say in exchange for free and affordable college, we want equitable admissions so that low-income students of color in particular have equal access to higher educational opportunities.
Piggybacking off of what Shabar just said too, from a funding perspective, I think there are some things that the K through 12 educational system can do, right? We can make sure that one, we have embedded in our curriculum for our students SAT preparation so that we give them those extra points that they would receive if they took a Kaplan course or something of the like, that we're preparing them in that regard. But also going back to Dr. Johnson's point, that dual enrollment piece, we're opening a high school. We were due to open this year, but because of COVID, I put the brakes on it. But we're opening a high school in September of 2021. Part of our high school program is dual enrollment. And part of that dual enrollment that a lot of people don't talk about is not just obtaining the college credits, but what that does for a family. If you're able to walk into a school and you have an associate's degree or 60 college credits, but you are also a high school senior and you're getting your high school and your associate's degree at the same time, that has eased some of that financial obligation at this time and made sure that access is available to a family who maybe didn't have 4 years of college tuition, but I'm able to pay 2 years and not come out of school straddled down with loans and debts, because that's the other piece of this. Yes, we get people into the door for college, but then we don't talk about the financing piece and the loans and the debt that they come out with. So we put our people further back behind the 8 ball, because when our kids are graduating, they're graduating with all of this debt that they can't move into society and take a low-paying job where they really don't make any money, but they're getting a lot of experience and they're learning, because guess what? They have these bills they need to pay back to school, so they don't get started on purchasing a house and being able to do all of those things. So I think it's imperative that K-12 systems really look at and think about how do we set our kids up for not just the success that happens here in our educational system, but after they leave us. What does that success look like, right? And take a very well-rounded look at how do we prepare them in that regard.
Dr. Jeter, real quick, how does COVID impact our children going forward, like in schools? Will COVID have an impact going forward?
Yes, COVID is already having an impact going forward. It's been quite the challenge as a sitting superintendent in a high poverty area. Number one, to get our families to understand and value education and that this is real. Although we're on a computer certain days of the week, it's still real education. And you hear the terminology or the slogan, COVID slide. That's real. We always experience the summer slide where children may not be as attuned into education over their summers, but add in COVID. And then also add in some of our schools or some of our children did not start school face to face. They were still virtual this school year and did not quite take it seriously. So yes, so your traditional schools or schools in general really need to consider not necessarily a year-round calendar for the coming school year, but some type of intensive academic support or education next summer to bring our students or catch them up from what they may have missed. And just to add, Meredith, just as it relates to the pathway from high school to college, that's crucial in COVID as well for our present seniors, those who graduated this past year, and our 11th graders. But we have to make sure that our children from the K-12 standpoint are exposed to schools. Sometimes you have families that may not have gone off to 4-year schools or 2-year schools, and they don't know. So it's no fault necessarily to the parent, but they just don't know. They don't understand. So that's where we come in, and we have to make sure that we're providing these experiences for those children, not just bringing the schools in, and that's great, but that when appropriate in COVID, we're able to take our children out to the various schools, be it HBCUs or your predominantly schools, and have conversations about which not just go off to this school because it's great, but do they have your major? Do they have what you're looking for? So there are other avenues that K-12 can do as well to ensure that there's a successful pathway from school to college or their career. Not all of our students want to go off to college. Make sure they get into a true high-paying career field if there are those that they want to pursue right out of high school.
Absolutely. Dr. Johnson, your thoughts?
Well, I actually wanted to ask my panelists or issue them this invitation to their colleges around. And what I was going to say is invite those professors of education to your schools. In many cases, our professors are teaching candidates, and they themselves have not been in the schools for a while. So I think it's important to invite those who are actually teaching the next generation of teachers to your schools so that they understand what's going on and what's happening in real time. I wanted to add that piece. And secondly, I wanted to follow up on a couple of points by our panelists. I think it's important that we do push the dual enrollment because, as we often know, many of our children are first generation graduates. So when they graduate, not only do they have loans, but in some cases, they're also financially and economically supporting family members. So it definitely helps in that case when you're when you have fewer loans, you have more income for yourself. We all know that, more income for yourself equates to more freedom. And secondly, we were discussing the idea of, and I think Dr. Jeffries, you discussed this idea of how, lack of a better term, upper middle class, wealthy institutions, and those traditional institutions like a Duke, like a Miami of Ohio, like a University of Georgia, have their own version of affirmative action. That's what you were actually describing, but it's their affirmative action. And I find that interesting when these arguments of affirmative action being unconstitutional and being illegal, and we hear these counter arguments, but when we think of things like legacy and gaining points just for having $2,000, when many of people in our community who are living day to day, who have to make food choices, rent choices, mortgage choices, don't have that extra income. And so I think that we have to remain aware that this idea of this this affirmative action idea and it being unconstitutional is a false argument. Because as Dr. Jeffries, as you eloquently stated, legacy, the traditionalism of some of these schools kind of have there already in place that type of affirmative action. So,
And I think one of the things you're hitting on, Dr. Johnson, that actually I was on a webinar the other day, and Dr. Goldie Muhammad, who was out of the University of Georgia and just a guru in cultural relevant pedagogy, was talking about. And it's been hitting home to me more and more as we implement a culturally relevant curriculum at our school, and we're doing this diversity, equity, inclusion work. We also, I think, as a community, have to start thinking, and Shavar touched upon it, about having for us, by us more in our schools and in our communities. I think it is vitally important that we really, we're always trying to work within the system, and I get it, and we're going to have to make sure that we're working within the system, but we got to start thinking about what does just our own system look like at some point, and how do we make sure that in our own system, we're giving all that we need to give to our kids? Because we've been waiting for Superman for a very long time, and it's an educational documentary, Waiting for Superman, right? We keep waiting for Superman, for Superman. I don't think there is a Superman. I think that we are the super people that we're waiting for. And we just need to make sure that we continue to show up and show out every time that we're in front of our kids, and that we give them that super person that we are. And while we're there showing out, we need to be bringing other people along with us, right? At our school, we managed to diversify the way that even our vendors look, right? We make sure that we go through the appropriate New Jersey procurement costs, but I make sure that in our bid specs, when we're putting out a job for that a small business company can come and do from our cleaning perspective, I made sure now that we craft our bid specs that are more open to women and minorities so that they have a seat at the table, by making sure that our insurance premiums are lower, or the insurance bond requirement is not something out of the woodworks, or that they have to have 50 other jobs that they've done before. Because if we're really going to make it for us, by us, we have to make sure that we can have a seat at that table, right? And I think that the school system in any shape or form, whether you are traditional public, whether you are a charter school, you are encompassing that community, right? You are there to serve that community. So why should the people that are coming in to do work for you not also be representative of that community? Because we need to make sure that those people have a seat at the table. I mean, we're not a big school, we're a pretty small school, but you take somewhere like a New York City or a Newark, and you think about just how much toilet paper they have to order overall for a particular school district of that size. You're talking about over $1 million contract to procure toilet paper. Something like that needs to be something that we can have a seat at the table at, right? So we need to, I think, from a very holistic organizational perspective, make sure that we think when we get into these seats and in these places, that we think of not just the academic, but we need to think of the organizational structure and how do we ensure that it's for us and by us.
Well, I
Yes,
think,
Daniel.
and to answer your
We are
question,
the
I think the answer is yes, because we're talking about a seat at the table, but we're also talking about creating your own table. So advocate for that seat and get your seat at the table while you're building your own table over there, so that
Yep.
so that we do have influence here and influence here and influence there. I remember Dr. Claude Anderson often talks about the idea of kind of ensuring that there's an economic structure as well. And even though we're behind the 8 ball due to a lot of historical issues, I mean, we can talk about Tulsa, we can talk about Rosewood, but it's kind of like, as we advocate for the systems already in place and continue to strive for those systems in place, we also build our own table. So I do see it as a both and what I also hear you saying is, we have to remove ourselves from this binary. Remove ourselves from this either or choice thinking, when the answer is both and yes.
Yes. Dr. Jeter?
Yes, and just in response to Danielle, we are those supermen and women. There is no one coming to bail us out. And I agree, I've seen all those educational documentaries as well. We are those individuals that are in these documentaries. It may have been someone else at the time in the movie, so to speak, but we are the present day supermen and superwomen. And we've been equipped to lead, which is why you see so often when we get in these high positions, women of color, men of color in these positions in education, you see so many rooting you on and cheering you on and so happy for you, because in essence, the Superman or Superwoman has arrived, so to speak. But then our job is also to pull others along with us, pull people up once you get into these powerful positions, and also mold other people into leadership. They may not be ready to step up right then. I totally understand it. I've been there. But when you serve as a mentor for that individual, when the time comes, they can move into your positions, because one day we're all going to retire. So we've got to make sure that we are preparing those behind us that are of color to lead in leadership as well.
Absolutely. Shavar Jeffries, and then I'm going to start wrapping it up, guys. But I wanted to ask you this. Republicans tend to want to eliminate the Department of Education. Why do you think that's so?
You know, a lot of the Republicans, they like the money from the feds, but they don't want any accountability mechanisms from the feds. They basically want the money without strings, right? So they have this whole idea of federalism, and the states should be able to make their own decisions. And we know as Black people, and frankly, even low-income folk broadly, that when states are allowed or left to their own devices, that oftentimes tends not to serve the interests of equity very, very well. And so they don't mind the money coming from the feds, but they don't want any accountability mandates. They don't want any civil rights mandates. They didn't want the IDEA mandates for children with disabilities. And so that's where those of us who are more progressive minded have to say, absolutely, the feds should and must invest in public education. Because in too many of our local communities, we know that public education in too many of our communities is funded by local property tax, which just perpetuates the inequities embedded in the historical ways in which communities have been constructed, arising out of redlining and other discriminatory practices. So the feds have to step in a big way to help fund public education through Title I and through other mechanisms. But we have to have those accountability mandates as well. We even see this in this conversation now in 2020. We hear a lot of folks, again, talking about free college, affordable college. That's beautiful. We hear Vice President Biden talking about tripling Title I. That is beautiful and that's amazing. But we also know we got to have some accountability mandates, some equity mandates, some civil rights enforcement mandates, so that otherwise the dollars will just finance the continued inequities that haven't served our communities well.
Wow, thank you so much. In 2 seconds, y'all, why is it important to vote during this election cycle? This election cycle is coming up in less than 20 days. Why is it important to vote?
In 2 seconds, I'll give a simple, quick one. 2 seconds, because our children matter. That's why it's important to vote. Our children's futures matter.
I think it's, just echoing what Dr. Jeter said, our children matter, and echoing what Shavar said. This election cycle, unlike any other cycle, it is really going to determine who controls the Supreme Court, who controls what the House and the Senate both look like, and most importantly, what our presidency looks like. And so when we talk about those accountability mandates or the pieces of accountability through legislation that we need to have in place, this election cycle determines that. So I think it is of crucial importance in order so that we don't roll back the hands of time. We make sure that we get out and vote, and we vote in our best interest to make sure that the hands of time are not rolled back. I was watching Lindsey Graham the other day, and he was doing the Supreme Court hearings. He asked the Supreme Court nominee, does she believe that segregation will return anytime soon? Not do you believe it will return again, but do you believe it will return anytime soon? And I think we need to listen to those words that we hear very carefully so that the hands of time are not before our eyes being rolled back very quickly. We think about the dictatorship that Hitler led and what happened to those people under Hitler's regime, under Hitler's charge. I think we need to be very mindful because we're on a very slippery slope. And this election for 2020 matters a whole heck of a lot for Black and brown people.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson.
Yes, we need to vote our interest. Our community, we have specific interests and we have specific needs. So it's important that we get out and vote and that we have an electorate and that we have legislators in place that will advocate for our interests and push for our interests. For example, in terms of education, we were just talking about how education is not a constitutional right. It's been reserved to the states. Well, if we have advocates and legislators in place, we may review review and re-examine the role of education played by the federal government. We may look at things like funding and how funding can be reallocated. We may look at how teachers are being developed and trained, and we can ensure or we can push for the type of rigorous education that's found in New Jersey, that's found in Maine, that's found on the coastal areas, and to make sure that we in these southern and Midwestern areas have education that's as competitive. So I think it's important that we vote our interests and the interest to our communities, for our communities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Shavar Jeffries.
Racial justice is on the ballot. Racial justice on really every level. Racial justice in the courts. We're gonna see if Judge Barrett becomes Justice Barrett. There's going to be a very conservative majority Supreme Court for maybe 25 years. So justice in the court system is on the ballot. Justice in terms of policing is on the ballot. Justice in terms of access to capital for Black and brown communities is on the ballot. And education, educational equity is on the ballot. Vice President Biden is in favor of tripling Title I. That'd be a historic investment in Title I. On the other hand, President Trump and almost every budget has tried to cut back on Title I, cut back on Pell Grants. He's basically gutted the Office of Civil Rights in the United States Department of Education, which is responsible for enforcing civil rights mandates in public education throughout this country. And so the best interest of our community is just simply on the ballot. Now, we should expect a revolution, right? I mean, all of what we might want to see from the next president, we may not see, because we also have a government that's designed for things to happen in a very incremental way. But on the other hand, we will see dramatic differences. And so people need to vote. They need to vote intelligently. They need to bring their families and communities out to vote. And then after that, we got to hold folks accountable so we can make sure that we receive what it is our community is supposed to.
Thank you so much. And our last question of the day, what is your Black business of the week? I'll start with you, Dr. Johnson, real quick.
The Wakanda Trailblazers. It's a small business started by Dr. Moise Baptiste, PhD of Educational Leadership, and he leads outdoor excursions in Chattanooga. So the Wakanda Trailblazers.
Thank you. Shavar Jeffries, your Black business of the week.
I'm gonna shout out my bank, Industrial Bank. Anybody anywhere in the country can sign up online. Headquarters in DC with a branch here in Newark, New Jersey. We're not going to get to where we have to be until we support our own financial institutions. Industrial Bank, please, please, please join.
Thank you. Dr. Jeter.
Oh, I have several, but I'm going to go quick. A friend of mine, sister of mine, Ishi Boutique here in the Birmingham, Alabama area. I've actually bought something this week for our homecoming game. My beautician, Tara Allen, Tara's Hair Salon, and several food trucks here in Birmingham. We actually had them at the office Friday, and two in particular, Old Turkey and All Shucks. So just local Black vendors.
Thank you. Danielle West, Augustin.
Well, I'm going to shout out Ada Chic Purses, which is a woman-owned purse line that is out of Africa, that is owned by Nicole Thomas and Meredith Lilly. And I also have one other business, Equity Consulting, which is an all-woman-owned educational consulting firm. They are based out of New York City, and they write curriculum for educational systems, large and small. They have been such a great asset and a wealth of knowledge in helping us to rewrite our curriculum.
Thank you. I'm going to shout out Slutty Vegan just because I eat there so much and it's so good. Good job, Pinky, on what you're doing for the community. So Slutty Vegans. So you guys, thank you so much. Thank you.
May I say one more thing?
Of course you can, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. Those of you who are actively engaged, and many of you at your schools and at your school districts, talk to young Black males about becoming classroom teachers. We definitely need more, and it will definitely enrich the educational environment to have more Black males as classroom teachers. Thanks.
I echo that, Dr. Johnson. I have 3 Black men in my building this year that are classroom teachers, and I can't tell you how long of a journey this has been to get to that place. So I echo that.
There's a Black male teachers collective out of Philly, Shreveport, Macon,
Yes.
great group of brothers, so they can help facilitate in this space too.
All right, thank you so much. You've heard from some of the most brilliant minds in the U.S. in terms of educators. As I close out today, I want to leave you with a quote that I just love from W.E.B. Du Bois, that education and work is a lever that uplifts a people. Education and work is the lever that uplifts a people. Now is the time. We don't have time to wait. We are fighting several pandemics. We are fighting COVID-19, racial inequality. We have to vote. Less than 20 days, November the 3rd. Get everyone that you know out to vote. Thank you, and I'll see you Monday for another edition of Town Hall.
Really well for the folks who are well connected. But for people in the communities that I serve and people sitting around their kitchen table right now, I don't think it's working well. I still believe in the American dream, but there's a disconnect between the American people and what we're getting in Washington. We're seeing how this is working, and so I would challenge the people of Georgia to try something different. I'm Raphael Warnock, and I approve this message.
No woman wants to be in an abusive situation, but there are many things that keep a woman in a situation because she feels like she has no options.
When you see the devastation this wreaks on women and families, I think for people of good conscience, it's impossible to ignore.
What you're going through, you did not cause any of this, and so you don't take any ownership in that. You don't have to stay stuck where you are.
I thought I lost my voice, but it took 2 or 3 hours of devotional, going to therapy, exercise. You then realize you're not alone. You work and you pray, you'll be successful. And my brother always would tell me, it's like an equation. You got to put it together.
Man up now, man up.
By 16 years old, I was on my own.
Paying for everything?
Paying for the bill. I had a little telemarketing job that I was working at night, going to high school during the day. The emotional attachment that you're supposed to have, the respect you're supposed to have for your family, I never saw it. I think God has really favored me and my wife because we have such a story and we have a testimony that God can heal.
I want to talk to you about the stakes in this election as plainly as I can. If we're going to get this virus under control, get folks back to work, and make sure affordable health care is available for everybody, we've got to send people to Washington who aren't interested in playing political games or making themselves rich. We've got to elect folks who will get to work for people like you. That's why I'm supporting Reverend Raphael Warnock in the special election for Senate. Reverend Warnock's someone I've known for years. He's a man of great moral integrity, a leader in the truest sense of the word. He's spent his life pushing for justice, fighting to expand health care, protecting voting rights and the dignity of work. You don't find a lot of people in Washington like Reverend Warnock, and that's exactly why we got to get him there. Please join me in supporting Raphael Warnock for Senate.
I'm Raphael Warnock, and I know we can do better. That's why I approve this message.
I'm John Ossoff. Truth is, corruption in Washington has infected both parties. They're too busy serving lobbyists to serve us. I'll ban corporate political donations and secret corporate money in politics, and I'll crack down on price gouging by health insurance and drug companies who use that money to buy off Congress. We're all in this together. Together we can end the corruption and make health care affordable. Fighting corruption is my job, and that's why I approve this message.